Welcome to Meet the Media with me, Eusebius McKaiser. In this special broadcast, we're going to be looking at the relationship between opposition parties and the media in South Africa. We are the ones who, of course, with a barrel of ink, are able to write whatever we want on a weekly basis, and they are the ones who are often under pressure to try and get the best possible coverage. Well, today there's a bit of a reversal of roles as we give the opposition party spokespersons an opportunity to critique and engage the media on how we actually go about our business. I'm very pleased to say that joining me for this special broadcast is firstly Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, who's the spokesperson of the Economic Freedom Fighters, as well as Refiloe Ntsekhe, who's the national spokesperson for the Democratic Alliance. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It must be really cool to actually come on a show where you don't have to defend your brand, your ideology. You're actually here to help us engage the media, Refiloe.
Absolutely. It's really nice for a change.
I want to start right at the
to
top,
end the year, yeah.
Mbuyiseni, which is just, I often think to myself, when I do see politicians moaning about the South African media, I think, oh, come on, man, this must be one of the easiest countries to be a political communicator because the media is quite easy to penetrate. You can have, a young pot of tea in the afternoon with someone. Is it an easy environment within which to be a spokesperson?
No, not at all, because it's not about access, it's about the actual content that gets reported. So we are contesting messages. And if you represent a radical alternative like we do in the Economic Freedom Fighters, that's very hard because the texture, the lexicon, the histories that inspire us, the concepts are different. And there is often no much work on the part of the people that we work with who report our stories to sort of depthen their knowledge of the things that we represent. And therefore, it's not really that I've got access, it's really what gets to be said at the end. And that's the objective, is that you've got to be able to impact the message. And to that extent, I think it's a very
again, he's complaining that his radicalism is misunderstood. Are you going to tell me your liberalism also gets sometimes an unfair hearing?
Look, I'll start on the basis of saying that in South Africa, though, we must be grateful because it's a democracy. There's a lot that's not censored. However, having said that, though, you still have to compete for media space on the basis of you might have a particular message you want to get out there, and that's not necessarily the message that the media is going to find sells their viewerships or their papers. So they decide what they take of yours and put in there. So you could put out a paragraph and they take one sentence out of the paragraph and the message is completely misconstrued because it's not in context.
Okay,
so those are the challenges.
Obviously newspapers like the Mail and Guardian, they will do the annual scorecard of how the state is getting on. Let's ask you guys a question, an evaluative question about us in the media. How good is political journalism in South Africa or not?
I think I would give it a 4.
A 4 out of 10,
yes,
really?
A 4.
At least it's a pass by my NG standard. How about you?
It's a fail.
Look, I think I would
unpack in a moment.
I'll take it higher and say I would possibly give it a 5. But it depends on media house to media house because different media houses would play different roles. I mean, SABC, I would probably give it 2 this year, if not less.
Sure. Why a 4, though?
Look, as I said, I think that there's a big problem in South Africa politically. The basic political question is representation. Which voices are being heard? And to that extent, we know that the voices that dominate in the country are privileged voices. And therefore that makes it hard. The stories of the poor, the media is metropolitan, the challenges of the majority of our people who live in the rural areas, who speak different languages other than English, and who live in a different, almost symbolic world, are not part of the national discourse, are not part of what we call the media discourse.
Absolutely.
That's terrible. It's a long-standing thing in this country because that means we actually don't know what the majority of South Africans think in this country. Why? Because the media remains metropolitan, number 1, but number 2, by a large extent, it remains English. And majority of the South Africans navigate their everyday life in a different world altogether. So in terms of the voices,
I'm not going to try and represent the whole of the media, but I think there's probably a lot of truth in that, isn't there? And the most we can say by way of mitigation, it doesn't make us not guilty, Refiloe, is that this is probably an international trend. You also found in America, the media unable to anticipate Trump in the UK, unable to anticipate Brexit, because to some extent we often behave, including some of the media houses where I work on, and I have to confess, like an echo chamber where we think our world is the world of the country.
Yeah. I think also to talk on what Mbuyiseni said, there's a big community radio stations are underrated in South Africa. And to be honest, those are the people that are actually talking to the people on the ground. And you find that the more commercial radio stations, platforms, let me call it platforms, they attempt to get the resources, they have the access, they've got a number of journalists to go out. A community radio station might have 1 or 2 journalists, and they're not able to cover everything that becomes the voice of that particular community within which they represent. That is also still a sad part of South Africa.
But then what is the implication of that for your political strategy? Do you simply say to yourself, and you're saying, you know what, I don't care what that liberal columnist Eusebius is saying in the Star, I'm going to bypass him by going to those communities that he doesn't access and just speaking to them directly? Or does it still matter what I say in my copy?
No, it does. You see, there's a second reason now. It's beyond representation. It's our media has no sense of history. You see, with the minimum wage debate, for an example, when we debated, we put it very sharply in Parliament in 2014. But because it's the EFF, maybe, because it comes from a political party that believes in socialism, we put it very convincingly, in fact, because we took historical cases, in international context, in this country, and demonstrated in numbers the ways in which it's going to transform people's lives on a daily basis, and how it will address inequalities and so on and so forth. You fast track, about 2 years later, Cyril Ramaphosa says it. Oh, it's such a breaking thing. It's a noble thing. So there is a serious ideological bankruptcy, as it were. And I blame it on a sense of history. You're too current. But the present is always, a result of the past. It is impossible to know whether something is truly new unless you have a sense of the past.
Refiloe, would you agree that there's a deep ahistoricism in the way in which the media sometimes approaches politics?
You know what it talks to for me? It's the juniorizing of journalism in South Africa. A lot of your seasoned journalists are not so much in the front lines anymore, especially your more prominent platforms. And that goes to that, where you don't actually have a background in history. Even the researching of stories, something is plastered in the media, and no proper research has gone behind it to actually determine both sides and get the truth. We are too quickly to sell the paper or to go on air and get a voice or an audio of the situation without researching properly. That is a challenge.
We're going to take a break there. Obviously, it's the festive season, so we're giving them a chance to skewer us, but we'll be back in January. Let's take a break. More about the relationship between opposition parties and the media after this.